Hey YouTube, how you doing? I'm Adam D'Angeli, professional political operative, and tonight I'm going to be talking about a lot of things that are going to probably make some people upset. Because we're going to be talking about the impeachments, and we're compelled almost to say what we want to hear. You know, Political operatives are either on Team R or Team D, or there's a few of them that work for both sides. We call those people uh, untrustworthy. But most of us work for one side or the other. I am a conservative. I work for a Republican lawmaker. I've run Republican campaigns. And of course, every side wants to promote their own narrative. So every Republican's going to say the Republicans did everything right, the Democrats did everything wrong. Democrats will say the Democrats did everything right, the Republicans do everything wrong. And that's not just the way it goes because of our own personal biases, although that's a big part of it. But of course, also, when you work in politics, that's what your side wants to hear. And the attitude is, if I want to come out and say that I think the Trump campaign did, or the Trump legal defense team did a lot of things poorly at the trial, the attitude is, you're hurting the president. Don't do that. You're hurting the president. And that's why there's so much motivation from everybody on either side to just stick with the script and not be critical. What's Adam Schiff going to say? Oh, the Trump team eviscerated us. Of course they're never going to do that. The problem is, if I just come out there and say the same thing that everybody else in the conservative media is saying, that the Trump team was spot on and wonderful, there's a problem that if that's not really the truth, and if we ignore and don't correct a problem with what we are doing, then we're going to keep doing it. My goal is to get Trump reelected. I want President Trump to win. I want him to succeed. And in order to do that, we have to be honest with ourselves about what's working and what isn't. So in this video, we're going to take apart the strategy that the Trump team has used in their opening remarks, which have been going on for the past 3 days. And we're going to apply the lessons about how this didn't work, and then see how we can actually fix it as grassroots leaders and supporters of President Trump between now and election day. Because that's the problem, fundamentally, is that if we do what the Trump defense team did, it's not going to do well for us. So if we don't confront the mistakes that they made, if we don't say, look, you shouldn't have done it this way, you got to do it differently, we're going to make the same mistakes, and we're going to lose the narrative. So I'm doing this because we need to win. We can't afford to lose. If there's one thing that is at stake, and this impeachment trial should have made this absolutely clear to any person that cares about our entire constitutional system, our rule of law, that we've come to a point now where the opposing side, the Democrats, are so motivated by their hatred for not just Donald Trump, but the America that elected him, that what will happen if they come to power in 2021 is the retributive destruction of not just the Trump legacy, but of the very institutions of our country that even allowed him to come to power in the first place, i.e., the will of the people. And of course, I know some Democrats to this day still complain, oh, well, you didn't win the popular vote. Yeah, that's like if a basketball team was to complain, well, we lost the best of 7 series, but we actually got more points. If any team said that, you would be ashamed of them. Trump won the game by the rules that the game was established by. He won the election fair and square. And this is actually almost getting to what my major complaint is about the Trump legal defense strategy. But let me start with this point here, because I've just said, I think the Trump team did a poor job, and from a legal perspective, as attorneys, they actually made an outstanding case. They really did. Alan Dershowitz did a great job laying out the constitutional arguments, with the caveat that I'll get to in a moment. But the whole team, I thought, in a court of law, they made a great argument, and the opposing side made a horrible argument. But here's the thing, and here's the problem. The Trump legal defense team approached this as though it was a court case. They're attorneys. They're not political operatives. I think, well, Pam Bondi, I know, is the Attorney General of Florida, so she is a politician or was a politician. But nonetheless, even as an Attorney General, her training, her day-to-day work is in the legal field, and people get accustomed to doing things that way. And they're seeing and they're thinking through the lens of being attorneys. And they decided from the get-go that we want to make the constitutional case that impeachment is invalid here. Here's the thing. This was not a trial. The Senate is not a court of law. No matter how much they want to call it, they can call themselves jurors. But the fact is they were, and they still are, they are not jurors. They are U.S. senators. And that is an inexorable distinction. Because a juror in any court of law has the privilege of knowing that whatever decision he or she renders, guilty or not guilty, whatever the award is, as jurors, they are not liable for their decision. They have complete independence to render their judgment based upon what in their heart they believe is the right thing. A U.S. senator is no such thing. They are politicians. They are elected by the people of their states. And unless they're planning to retire and not seek re-election or higher office, they are subject to the will of the people in the next election. And by the way, even if they are actually thinking of retiring, oftentimes thinking they're going to, maybe want to go back or what have you. I mean, most of them, they care about their legacy, yada, yada, yada. So even though they are, and they call themselves jurors, they are not. They are senators, and they are still subject to the very pressures of their constituents and of the world of politics. And likewise, what's really going on here, if we're honest, I mean, we understand the Senate's not going to get to 2/3 to vote to expel the president from office. The real agenda here, as we all can see, is they're trying to dirty up the president for the election coming up. Which is ironic when you think about it. The very thing that they accuse the president of doing is what they are actually, in fact, doing, is using their office as a tool of a political attack. It's unbelievably hypocritical. And this gets to the main failure of the Trump defense team. It's like they are an all-star baseball team that was called to play a game of football. They've made an outstanding legal case because they're outstanding lawyers, I am sure. But they are not politicians. They are not political hacks like me. And they're not thinking about this the way that they should, which is, what is the actual practical political effect of these proceedings? They're making legal arguments. What they're not making is political arguments. Here's the first problem. There is an extremely important axiom in campaign tactics and strategy. It's one of the most important rules there is. And it's this. If the other side is on offense and you are on defense, you are losing. Always. They're attacking, you're defending. No good comes to you. Your best defense will get you a 0 loss. They're attacking. They have the ball. They have the power. So Trump is on trial. He is the defendant. Every moment of this has him on defense. That's why the Democrats took all of their time, and the Republican side, the president's counsel, took only half of theirs. Because they understand every minute we're in the situation hurts the president. There is only one suitable reaction to being under attack. Well, if the attack's not strong enough, you can ignore it. But you never repeat an attack. You never go on defense. The only suitable response to an attack, if you must respond, is a counterattack. A counterattack. And Trump's team is not counterattacking. They're defending. That is a fatal mistake. They opted, for the most part, not to go on counter-offense. There was a little bit here and there. It wasn't nearly enough. There was a little bit from Pam Bondi talking about Burisma and the Bidens. Very little. Here's how a defense should have opened their case in the very beginning. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, or whatever the greeting is, blah, blah, blah. As anyone with any common sense has been able to see from the moment that Donald Trump announced his candidacy for the presidency, his opposition has been animated by an overwhelming, all-consuming, burning hatred for him as a person, for his policy prescriptions, but most of all, for him as a person. And they have been unable to accept every aspect of his ascendancy through the Republican nomination, through winning the election, through his inauguration, to the present day. You know it. We know it. The American people know it. Everybody knows it. And look at this and this and this and this. And, of course, they talked about a little bit the Mueller investigation. They didn't go back so far as to the very beginning, which they should have, by the way. They should have put a little bit of a lick of flame under some of the Republicans because, here's one of the other problems that's going on here. The Democrats are absolutely united in their hostility towards Donald Trump. But, remember, Trump didn't just beat the Democrats to get elected. He also took on the entire Washington establishment, and a good chunk of that was the conservative establishment. You'll remember he took on Bush's foreign policy, which, I'm shocked he ever thought it was a wise idea to hire John Bolton in the first place. Let's hire somebody who opposes my entire foreign policy agenda. I'll put him in charge of my foreign policy. Unflippin' believable. Who could have imagined that would have backfired? But, hindsight 2020, I guess. But anyway, what the defense should have done from start to finish was over and over and over again, constantly make the argument that the opposing side was driven by malice. They never even said that. Not directly. They implied it here and there. But the vast majority of their case was based upon the constitutional argument, what Alan Dershowitz in particular laid out. They never went on offense. They never went on counter-offense. They talked a little bit about the Clinton impeachment. In fact, I'm going to play the clip of their closing argument because that really encapsulates the failures of what the Trump team failed to do. But, one of their best things was the contrast between this and the Clinton impeachment. And they talked a little bit about it. They used it to kind of hold up some of the Democrat members who were around in the Clinton impeachment time to their hypocrisy. But what they didn't do was draw the real contrast between the allegations against Trump, which do not have evidence substantiating them, versus the evidence against Bill Clinton, including his DNA evidence from his semen on Monica Lewinsky's blue dress. They could have used so much vivid language to point out, Clinton was busted committing perjury. He told the American people, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And then when the DNA evidence proved that he did, quid pro quo sexual harassment, which is what that is, by the way, legally. Legally, if you are someone's boss and you're having an affair with them, the courts have an assumption that there was a quid pro quo, suck me off and you won't lose your job. That's, the revolting, vivid, explicit language that the Trump defense team should have thrown out there constantly. They should have been on offense. It should have been a never-ending stream of shame. Shame on you, you liars. You know what you're doing. You hate the president. You seized upon the flimsiest of excuses you could possibly find. But they didn't do that. And why not? Well, in a court of law, character evidence is generally inadmissible. They were lawyers playing the legal game. They were playing the wrong game. Saul Alinsky, communist organizer, author of a book called Rules for Radicals. Now, political technology applies, it's neutral, it's ideologically neutral, both sides can use it, and Saul Alinsky knew what he was doing. One of the things that he said is the most powerful weapon in politics is ridicule. Ridicule, derision. You didn't see that from the Trump defense team. Now, to be fair, I would love for the Trump defense team to have used a great deal of humor in their arguments. You could open up and say, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, senators, you understand it's not actually possible for Trump to have gotten dirt on Joe Biden from Ukraine over the fact that he uses political influence to enrich his son with a corrupt Ukrainian company. That's just being silly. I mean, come on, we're talking about Hunter Biden. What good is that? This is a guy who just had a settlement with the stripper that is the father of his child. Stuff like that. Now, the problem with that is if the attorneys were to actually make these claims, it would alienate the Republican senators, because that's the problem with using humor, is they're so full of themselves up there. I mean, they're politicians. This august body. This is the third impeachment in American history, and this is so critical. The senators could, though. The senators could. McConnell could. They all took breaks. They all got to talk to the media. They had the opportunity for derision. They had the opportunity to ease the tension. I mean, one of the things that people like about Trump is he's funny. He can make light of the worst situation. He uses that to his benefit. People relate to humor. It touches them at their core. And when these politicians come up, like robots, it alienates the public. And the best thing they could have done, what the Trump defense team could have done, was to find and exploit every opportunity to take the other side down a peg. But they didn't. They made the exact opposite argument. They made the constitutional argument, which puts the American public to sleep. And also it puts them on extremely tenuous footing. Like, think about the case that Alan Dershowitz made. He's talking about what the Constitution says about the standard of impeachment, high crimes and misdemeanors. And there's this constant back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans about what does high crimes and misdemeanors mean. Here's the problem. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, the Senate is 80% Democrat. Okay? And the House doesn't argue what they argue. They instead argue, we want to remove President Trump from office because he's a duty head and he's icky and we don't like him. And the Senate, 80% Democrat, votes 80% to 20% to remove him from office. What happens if that goes to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court says, well, Constitution says Senate has sole power to impeach. It doesn't say the Supreme Court can overrule that. And here's the problem. There's been a lot of challenges to the various branches of power in our country over the years. In fact, the whole notion of the supremacy of the judiciary to overrule Congress and to overrule the executive branch came from Marbury versus Madison, which was a 4-0 Supreme Court decision, in which the Supreme Court basically said, yeah, we've got total review because, hey, it doesn't give that power to anybody else, right? But the court, there is certainly in our culture this understanding that we have this principle of separation of powers. So if the court was to overturn Congress, because, to have impeachment, you've got to have a majority in the House and a 2/3 majority in the Senate. And the court comes out and says, we don't think the standard that the House or Senate was good enough, that would cause an uproar. The Senate's not going to do that. The fact is, it's not what the Senate considers high crimes and misdemeanors in a legal setting. Dershowitz is wrong about this. This is not a trial. This is not a legal proceeding. This is a political proceeding. And impeachment is, in actual fact, regardless of what any member of Congress says, Impeachment is whatever they vote it means. Period. If they and Dershowitz kind of hinted at this, if the Senate votes to expel Trump from power, they have lowered the bar for what impeachment is. But the fact is, the only thing that's stopping that bar from moving right now is, in actual fact, the political pressures on the Senate coming from the public, which is not as much as it should be. But that's a fundamental problem. The legal argument that they're trying to put out here is, first they actually do, to their credit, say, we don't believe that Trump was doing anything other than what was his constitutionally granted power and for good motives. But their big argument is, even if he did have a political motive, and this is what Dershowitz said, it's still not an impeachable offense. Well, yes, it is. It is if Congress votes to impeach, period. So, in place of going for the jugular and attacking the Democrats on their motives, they're making a legalistic argument of dubious merit, and which the American public doesn't give a crap about, frankly. If you talk to the average person, one side or the other, they're going to either say, well, did he use his office to get dirt on his political opponent? Big or small, doesn't matter. Nixon, obviously, in his case, he was literally spying on his opponent in a very dramatic way that was undeniable, and which led to a bipartisan impeachment that he ultimately resigned and therefore didn't have a whole trial about, but he saw the writing on the wall. Times are different now, and threadbare as it is, if the Democrats push it and they convince the public that this matters, it matters. That's all there is to it. Now think about how the Trump team used time. So first you had the Democrats. They went for nearly the full 24 hours for 3 days, and they just repeated the same things over and over and over and over again. Just again and again and again and again. I don't think anybody watched the entire thing except the actual members of the U.S. Senate themselves. Nobody could stand it. It was so boring and repetitive. So then Trump's team uses half their time, and they make a big to-do about this. They say, we're not going to waste your time. We're not going to repeat ourselves. We're going to just lay out our case, and we're going to get done early, and you guys can go out for dinner. And, the strategy here is kind of obvious. The Democrats bored you to death. We're going to keep it interesting, and we're not going to waste your time, right? From a legal perspective, maybe that makes sense. But think about what they're doing and why. And keep in mind, by the way, remember, Trump's team are attorneys, but not politicians necessarily. The Democrats' team are attorneys, and they are politicians. They aren't doing things for no reason. So what was their reason for taking the full, I think they used 22 hours out of the 24. Why they just keep saying the same thing over and over and over again? Well, first of all, that's actually a legal tactic. Repetition is the key to getting your message imprinted. So you want to say it again and again and again. Moreover, here's the point. They're telling the Democrat members of the Senate, these are your talking points. Here they are again, in case you didn't get it the first time. We'll tell you again in case you didn't get it the second time. You're here for 22 hours. We're going to keep going over this over and over and over again so you all get it. These are your talking points. It was messaging guidance. And for the audience, to say the same thing again and again and again is to have it in print. And besides that, of course, they want to drag it out as long as they can. Because as they perceive it, every minute of this is hurting the president. And in fact, it is, because his team was not going on counter offense. Now, think about it from their side. Keep it short, keep it simple. Contrast with the Dems being obnoxiously repetitive. But there's a big downside here. Remember, their goal is a summary dismissal. They don't want there to be witnesses called. So you are given 24 hours to make your opening arguments. Then you're going to have more days of questioning. If you can eat up their time and bore them and make them want to move on. And remember, they're senators. They've got all these important bills that lobbyists want them to pass. There's billions and trillions of dollars in play. And instead of getting to do that and be senators, they're sitting here at this trial. So by not taking up all their time, they lost out on the ability to subject the senators to the time pressure, to making them want to get it over with. And here's another huge downside. They didn't get the opportunity to imprint their talking points. They actually raised a lot of issues, but most of them they only raised once. And during the closing arguments, even then, they didn't repeat them. Now, I mean, a lawyer will tell you, the simplest way to make your case is an opening statement. You lay it out. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say A, B, C, and I'm going to prove X, Y, and Z. Then in the evidence and the arguments, you say the same thing again. Closing statement. You repeat it. I said I was going to say this. I said this. I proved this. I summarized. You summarize it. You lay it out. Instead, they hit on some points only once. Pam Bondi was the only one that brought up, Burisma and the Bidens. Then they never went back to it. Hey, if your point is that Trump had a good reason for being concerned about what the Bidens were doing in Ukraine, don't just say it once and move on. Hammer on it. Say it again and again and again and again. Say it again. That Biden clip, they played it, I believe, twice. The one, where he says, son of a bitch, they fired him after I demanded they fire the guy. They had 12 hours they didn't use. They could have played that clip for 12 hours on loop. Now, that would have been torturous, but it would have driven the point home hard. They didn't choose to do that. And as I said, for all the time, they didn't even make the most important talking point of all, which is that the other side's agenda, as anyone with common sense could see, was animated by their hatred for the president and their burning desire to remove him. They didn't ever even say it that way. Let me point out another terrible mistake that the Trump team did. They didn't lay out what they actually wanted the senators to do. There's a huge question here that nobody is even considering, which is procedure. How does the Senate ultimately reach their decision? Are they going to say, well, Trump's guilty or he's not guilty? Which, again, from the perspective of Trump, this is either you lose or you don't win. Those are the best options you get. And in a criminal defense case, that's okay. Because in a criminal defense case, if the other side's argument is so bad, well, maybe not criminal defense, but certainly in civil defense, in certain circumstances, if the other side's case is so bad, you win on acquittal, you defend your case if you're the defendant, and perhaps, depending on the charges and the circumstances or or whatever you're being sued over, potentially you can recoup legal fees, damages, possibly. But because they just kind of assumed this is a criminal trial, the assumption is it's between guilty or not guilty. Why didn't the defense team say, hey, members of the Senate, what you should do is you should pass a resolution saying not only is Trump not guilty, but we find that the House brought these charges in bad faith with the intent to take away the will of the American people. Why didn't they say that? Because they're lawyers. They're not political operators. And they didn't think to talk to someone who thinks about these things, which is what you should be doing when you're making a political case before a political body. They could have called for that resolution. The other thing they could do, but they didn't, is they could have said, there's these two charges. One is abuse of power, which the Dems have said is because we claim that Trump's withholding of aid to Ukraine is improper, and we know he was motivated by blah, 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 blah. So there was that one. Then there is the obstruction of Congress, which is by far, to the extent the other charge is weak in the first place, this one is 1,000 times weaker. Because in this case, the Supreme Court actually said, we'll hear this. We'll take this up. There's a disputation between the executive branch and the legislative branch. It's the Supreme Court's job in this case to field that. In fact, Dershowitz weeks ago made that point when this first happened. He said, the Democrats, that whole charge was mooted when the Supreme Court agreed to take up that case. Somehow, he forgot to make that point in his argument yesterday. Because here's what the Republicans could do. We understand there's some pressure from some of their members, maybe 4 of them. I can guess who they might be. Maybe there's more, to bring in Bolton and others as witnesses. Okay, they could say, you know what, fine. And we're now hearing they don't have the votes to not have witnesses, so it looks like that's where they're going. But here's what McConnell could do, if he thinks of it. He could say, okay, let's vote to dismiss the obstruction of Congress charge because we know that's garbage. And we'll hear the witnesses as relates to the first charge because that has nothing to do with the second charge. Could do that. Might yet. Hasn't indicated he will. Probably won't. But the lawyers didn't even suggest it. And here's this actually gets to another deficiency too. They didn't layer their arguments well. Like in a lawsuit, for example, a defendant might say, this court should think, first of all, jurisdiction's improper. And even if the court says jurisdiction's proper, their evidentiary argument's no good. And even if their evidentiary argument's no good, we're still not guilty for this reason. You layer the arguments and you say, even if this is true, and is not, they still have no case. But they didn't do that. They didn't conclude. So with that in mind, like I said, I'm not going to replay the entire, obviously it's hours and hours long, but let's listen in to the Trump team's closing of the opening remarks. This is Cipollone. No, he's not summarizing. Well, shoot, let's just play the clip. Hold on one sec. Here we go.
Well, I had kind of a lengthy presentation prepared, but I think you've heard a lot from our side, and I think we've made our case.
No, this is your opportunity to make your case. You've just gone on for 11 hours. You now need to summarize everything that you've just said for the past 11 hours. You've had a number of attorneys hitting on different angles. You need to summarize your case. Don't just say, you heard what I said, so we're done, right? What in what legal case does the lawyer do that? No, you have the floor. Use it. It's their turn to listen to you. Don't just say, I'm going to throw away these last 12 hours I have and just wrap this up now. No, make your case. All right, continuing.
And so I just want to leave you with a couple of points. First of all, thank you, Mr. Leader, and thank you, Democratic Leader Schumer, and all of you for the privilege of speaking on the floor of the Senate and for your time and attention. We really appreciate it. We've made 3 basic points. 1, all you need in this case is the Constitution and your common sense.
2 things senators don't have. Okay, I'm being facetious. But these are politicians. Their conscience and the Constitution are, and I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans, I'm talking about all politicians now. They are characterized by the subordination of their conscience and the Constitution to their political ambitions. That's just the way it is. That's why it's a partisan impeachment. Because if they were thinking about the Constitution and their conscience, you would see some kind of roughly equal distribution of yeses and nos from both parties. It's a partisan impeachment because one side is helped and one side is hurt. And that's the calculation they're making.
You just look at the articles of impeachment. The articles of impeachment fall far short of any constitutional standard, and they are dangerous.
True. Doesn't matter.
And if you look to the words from the past that I think are instructive, as I said last night, they're instructive because they were right then and they're right now. And I'll leave you with some of those words.
There must never be a narrowly voted impeachment or an impeachment supported by one of our major political parties and opposed by the other. Such an impeachment will produce the divisiveness and bitterness in our politics for years to come and will call into question the very legitimacy of our political institutions.
This is unfair to the American people. By these actions, you would undo the free election that expressed the will of the American people in 1996. In so doing, you will damage the faith the American people have in this institution and in the American democracy. You will set the dangerous precedent that the certainty of presidential terms, which has so benefited our wonderful America, will be replaced by the partisan use of impeachment. Future presidents will face election, then litigation, then impeachment. The power of the president will diminish in the face of the Congress, a phenomenon much feared by the founding fathers.
This is a...
Okay, that was really good. Because, of course, that's Gerald Nadler and Zoe Lofgren, who are now the House impeachment managers, and that was them in 1998 arguing against Clinton's impeachment. That being said, it's still a weak argument because they're saying, well, here's what you believe then, but Republicans believe the opposite then. So the hypocrisy kind of cancels out. What they didn't do, which they had the opportunity to do, was to draw distinctions between the Clinton impeachment and this impeachment. Clinton committed perjury before the American public, lying about having sexual relations with an intern. That's an extraordinarily terrible defect of character. It's quid pro quo sexual harassment, and for which he was caught red-handed lying only after evidence was dug out that proved it. All of those things could have been raised, but they didn't. There's like, here's what you said then, now here's what you say now. I mean, they had Alan Dershowitz saying, I said then this, but I changed my mind, and that's what academics do. Well, they can say, oh, yeah, we're politicians. We can change our minds, too. Yeah, my thinking has evolved on this issue like it evolves on other issues. I'm not inclined. I don't have to think the same thing all the time. You know, it's a nice demonstration of hypocrisy, but not enough. I don't know who this guy is. I assume he must be a Democrat member of the Senate now, but here he is saying the same sort of thing. And then we'll have Chuck Schumer in a moment.
Not an impeachment resolution. The Republicans are crossing out the impeachment standard of high crimes and misdemeanors, and they are inserting the words any crime or misdemeanor.
You know, it's funny they play this, though, because that argument sounded weak then. Still a crime, right? You know, politicians shouldn't be committing any crime, should they? So, why even use this? You know, do they think this Democrat member of the Senate, I assume that's who this must be, is going to be browbeaten by this? I doubt it.
We are permitting a constitutional coup d'etat, which will haunt this body and our country forever.
I warn my colleagues that you will reap the bitter harvest of the unfair partisan seeds you sowed today. The constitutional provision for impeachment is a way to protect our government and our citizens, not another weapon in the political arsenal.
I expect history will show that we've lowered the bar on impeachment so much. We have broken the seal on this extreme penalty so cavalierly that it...
Yeah, and now they're lowering it even further. By the way, notice this too. They're just playing one clip after the next. They're not stopping after each one and spelling it out for the public. You know, they're assuming people are going to go, oh yeah, that's Zoe Lofgren. We just heard from her 4 days ago. They're assuming the American people will recognize that's the same person who now is saying Trump should be impeached, saying before Clinton shouldn't be impeached. This is I don't know what other word but laziness. They have all the time in the world. They should take all that time to spell out the case as carefully as they possibly can. Cindy, I see your question. I'm going to play a little bit more of this, but let me address. I do want to address your point here.
Will be used as a routine tool to fight political battles. My fear is that when a Republican wins the White House, Democrats will demand payback.
You were right. But I'm sorry to say you were also prophetic. And I think I couldn't say it better myself, so I won't.
Couldn't say it better myself, so I won't. This is, yet again, foregoing the opportunity to say it better. To say it better, to spell it out, to spell out the hypocrisy. Cindy, thank you for being here and chatting. It sounds like you're on the other team. That's fine. The problems Clinton Clintons didn't have to do with his abuse of the office. Well, two things at that point. First of all, number one, Clinton committed perjury under oath. So it's not abuse of office, doesn't make it not a crime. Second, perjury relating to sexual misconduct in his office. Also problematic. And as to this case, it's the Trump's defense team's argument. He exercised his constitutional power, and they have no evidence to prove that he was motivated by animus toward Joe Biden. That's the argument. But again, that's the legal argument. And I think Trump's team did fine making the legal argument against impeachment. But they're playing the wrong game. This is not law. This is politics. All right, so anyway, going to wrap this up here. I think we got just a few minutes left.
You know what the right answer is in your heart. You know what the right answer is for our country. You know what the right answer is for the American people. What they are asking you to do is to throw out a successful president on the eve of an election with no basis and in violation of the Constitution. It would dangerously change our country and weaken forever all of our democratic institutions.
This is a fair point he's making, but it's a weaker point than the one he could be making. He says, this damages our democracy, this harms the will of the American people, takes away their ability to make a decision in November. What he could be arguing, but for some reason has chosen not to, is they are doing the very thing they are accusing the president of having done. Only what they accused the president of having done was in one phone call suggesting that he might investigate the corruption connected to the Biden family. What the Democrats are doing is using their House majority to have dragged the Senate into a trial that is occupying the attention of the American public at the expense, of course, of everything else that Congress could be doing over this time, for the purpose of dirtying up the president, of smearing him and tarnishing him to influence the outcome of the election. They're doing the very thing they accuse the president of doing. And the funny thing is, here's another thing that they didn't think of. Or maybe the Republicans will do it yet. It hasn't come up yet. But I'd be curious to see what would happen if the Senate does actually subpoena Hunter Biden or Joe Biden or Adam Schiff. Some of them have suggested, there's a lot of questions about how he came to have knowledge of this phone call. He could be a witness in this. And you say, well, he's an attorney, so he can't be a witness. That's BS. If you have a hearing for judgment for attorney's fees in a civil matter, the attorneys have to testify, saying, here's what I billed for and why. Lawyers can testify. So what happens if Schiff resists having to testify if the Senate majority under Mitch McConnell subpoenas him? And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to demand the Supreme Court weigh in on this. Okay, so you're doing the very thing you're accusing Trump of doing. I mean, they could make these arguments. But so far, from all that we've seen, they're taking a defensive posture. And that's the first mistake in politics. If you are on defense, you are losing.
You all know that's not in the interest of the American people. Why not trust the American people with this decision? Why tear up their ballots? Why tear up every ballot across this country? You can't do that. You know you can't do that. So I ask you to defend our Constitution, to defend fundamental fairness, to defend basic due process rights, but most importantly, to respect and defend the sacred right of every American to vote and to choose their president.
That's actually a pretty good argument. You should have made it for an additional hour. Cindy, this is not, you're saying what Trump did was tearing up a ballot. No, that's not. It's just not. Sorry. At best, even to assume everything happened in the manner that the Democrats are accusing it of happening, that's still basically trying to come up with a line of attack. That's not tearing up anybody's ballot. The voters will decide. The voters have the evidence that the Democrats have given them. They have the evidence the Republicans have given them. And they will ultimately judge when they go to the ballot box. That's not tearing up anybody's ballot. They still have the ability to make that decision.
Election is only months away. The American people are entitled to choose their president.
And to be clear, Cindy, what he's saying is if they find him guilty by 2/3 majority, he won't just be expelled from office. He'll also be taken off the ballot in 2020. So that is tearing up a ballot because literally the American public will be prevented from voting for him. They will be physically prevented from voting for him. That's a distinction.
Overturning the last election and massively interfering with the upcoming one would cause serious and lasting damage to the people of the United States and to our great country. The Senate cannot allow this to happen. It is time for this to end, here and now. So we urge the Senate to reject these articles of impeachment for all of the reasons we have given you.
Okay. Here again, you said, we urge the Senate to reject these articles of impeachment. This was his opportunity to say exactly what he wants the Senate to do, with much more specificity than just rejecting the articles of impeachment. He could say, we urge you to condemn this terrible accusation from the House, these calumnies, this politically motivated impeachment. I mean, they could have gone over the top, but no, just reject the articles of impeachment for all the reasons we've given you. Give them again. Do you understand the American people are watching this? I mean, not all that many, but there's still a lot, you know. Yeah, you know, it'd be great if more Americans paid this close attention to the proceedings of Congress, but there are a few that do. And you can't assume that every single one of them has been listening to the last 36 hours of back and forth. Actually, it's more than that because there was also the procedural votes on the first day. State your case. Restate your case. State it again and again and again. You have the time. It's only 3 in the afternoon. It's not even 3 in the afternoon yet. They said you could go to dinner time if you wanted to.
You know them all. I don't need to repeat them.
Yes, you do.
They've repeatedly said over and over again.
Smartly, they repeat themselves. That's trial law 101. Repeat yourself. Make your argument again and again and again and again. You have to convince the judge and the jury. And you do that by saying your case more than once.
Quote from Benjamin Franklin, "It's a republic if you can keep it." And every time I heard it, I said to myself, it's a republic if they let us keep it. And I have every confidence in your wisdom,
Whoop-de-doo.
you will do the only thing you can do, what you must do, what the Constitution compels you to do. Reject these articles of impeachment for our country and for the American people.
The Constitution doesn't compel their action. Their conscience compels their action. But that's a minor point in the context of a much more deficient conclusion than what they've come up with. And this is crazy. I mean, come on. I'm the legislative assistant at a state level, in a state legislature. This guy's the counsel of the president, one of the smartest men in America. And this is the argument he makes when the entire world's spotlight is on him to defend the president. He says, yeah, we don't need that other 12 hours. You can have it back. We made our case once.
It will show that you put the Constitution above partisanship. It will show that we can come together on both sides of the aisle and end the era of impeachment for good. You know it should end. You know.
So he's coming back here to a point which he made many hours ago, I think days ago. And he's a little bit overdue to refresh their memories what he's talking about here. But I think the very beginning, he starts by saying that we're in the era of impeachment. And they went through, of course, there was the Clinton impeachment, there was the Nixon impeachment, and there was a number of threats of impeachment to other recent presidents. And they made this point that we've got to the point where we're impeaching presidents over lighter and lighter things now. And there was an opportunity to really get into that in more depth, because there's impeachment. At the same time, it happened just last year, but there's also been this major constitutional problem we're having now with confirmation and the politicization of that. I was watching this interview with Lindsey Graham the other day. He was saying, I was one of the few Republicans that voted for Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor. And I got a lot of grief for it from my Republican base, because they said, we know these people are going to vote against us. They're going to vote for abortion, et cetera, et cetera. You should have voted no on them. And he says, well, my reasoning then was that the job of the Senate is supposed to be that we don't deny justices their seat just based upon that we disagree with how they're going to rule. That's not what the Senate's supposed to do. We're supposed to confirm nominees simply because they're qualified. It's not our job to say we don't agree with their policies, so we're gonna be a roadblock to every single presidential appointment over policy reasons. And that's all gone by the wayside now. He says, Antonin Scalia, who by all accounts was one of the most conservative justices in living memory, was approved almost unanimously. So were most Democrats. And then really it started with Clarence Thomas, when all the Democrats voted against him. And of course, now the same thing happened with Gorsuch. Same thing happened with Kavanaugh, where it no longer became about just are they fit for office. It's now, we don't like his policies, or in the case of Kavanaugh, they attacked his character and what have you. So Lindsey Graham said, we're at a point now where it's clear we are long past nonpartisan confirmations. It is a partisan process. That is the way it is now, and that's where things are. And I don't see how we're going to get back from that, because at the end of the day, and he didn't say this, but the reason why it come to this is because in the information age, we're all actually watching the government more closely than people ever used to be able to. People are judging their politicians on their votes. These are what they think are the most important votes, and they are compelled to vote for what their party's base wants. And that means voting in a partisan manner on confirmation and now impeachment. So Cipollone says, we should reject the age of impeachment. I think it's a weak argument, because it's not just like there's some random craze out there. This is where our entire political system has gone and where it's going to keep, and this is where it's going. And rather than saying we need to end the age of impeachment, what he should be saying is this is permanently threatening our country. This is threatening the entire system that our founders envisioned in a very fundamentally dangerous way. And to be fair, some of the other attorneys had said this previously, but again, this is closing argument, well, closing of the opening. But this is when you summarize what you had said. This is when it's most important to be repeating your best points. And instead, he's just weakly making the weakest arguments possible. It is sad. And now for the final moments.
It will allow you all to spend all of your energy and all of your enormous talent and all of your resources on doing what the American people sent you here to do, to work together, to work with the president, to solve their problems.
Once again, good point, skimmed over. They should have been slamming on that. Because remember, their goal is a quick a quick dismissal. Their goal is we want no witnesses, we want this over and done with. And he could be slamming on. Every day this goes on, you're not giving the American people an infrastructure deal. Every day that this goes on, you're not renegotiating our trade agreements. Every day that this goes on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They should be pounding on this, that they are taking away their precious time as senators from the things that they want to do in their precious time in office. That's a point that should be slammed on, but instead it's just casually tossed out there because I guess we got to wrap this up right now, even though we got 12 hours to spare.
So this should end now, as quickly as possible.
As quickly as possible.
Thank you again for your attention. I look forward to answering your questions. And with that, that ends our presentation. Thank you very much.
And with that ends our presentation. Way to end on a strong note right there, buddy. Let me reiterate. I'm not saying this to trash Trump's team. That's not my intention. My intention is for us to learn from this. Because there is an election coming up in 9 months. And the outcome will be determined most of all by what the grassroots activists on either side do and who is more effective. The Democrats spent their 24 hours over 3 days laying out exactly the points that they need to hammer on day after day after day after day. Don't be surprised if their people are going to be saying the same thing day after day after day after day. Quid pro quo, etc., etc. Ours needs to say the same thing too. Well, they should be on the same page. And the page is the arguments that are effective. And that is not going to be the constitutional argument laid out by Alan Dershowitz. It is simply that this entire impeachment, and everybody can see it, even the Democrats can see it with clarity. They know they've wanted Trump gone from the day he was elected. And they were hoping, praying that Robert Mueller would find a smoking gun, some wrongdoing. And they ripped through thousands of pages. They interviewed thousands or at least hundreds of witnesses. The investigation dragged on for years. They've had disloyal members of the administration leaking from the very beginning. Not just the Democrats, although of course all the Democrats hate Trump's guts to their core, but remember that Trump campaigned on upending the Washington establishment, changing the consensus on foreign policy, attacking the whole consensus that we need to go to a more globalist system and we need to work with other nations, and said, no, I'm going to put Americans first. He didn't just alienate the Democrats. There is a bipartisan Washington establishment that has been out to get Trump from day one. And everybody knows it. And everybody knows that this impeachment is based on nothing more than their burning desire to get him out of office by any means possible, whether it was now or last year or the year before or next year or any time. Just make it happen. Get the evil man out of there. They are animated by their hatred, and they don't care if they destroy our constitutional system if that's what it takes to get him out. That's the message that Trump's lawyers didn't make. But that's the message that matters to the American public. Because part of the reason the American public nominated Donald Trump was because everybody in the media was telling them, you can't. We will not let Trump be our president. You heard that from the Republican Party bosses if you were involved in the Republican Party at that time. And of course, it happened again during the election. After the election, they tried to sabotage the inauguration. They tried the Electoral College, everything to deny the American people who they voted for. The American people don't like that, because that is a challenge to their ability, to our very sacred notion of self-governance. So that's, I guess, where I'm going to leave this. And I hope, I hope someone out there with a larger platform than I have, because I'm just some rando on YouTube making a video that I'll be lucky if it gets, 50 views. That won't change a whole lot of people's minds. That certainly won't swing an election. But somebody with a platform needs to be explaining to the people in the grassroots that you have to do what works with a message that will win. And what Trump's attorneys have put forth is not a politically winning message. Legally, it was great. And if you're in law school, you want to be an attorney, they made a strong constitutional defense. Great. But if you want Trump to win the next election, don't do what they did. So with that, I'm going to sign off to the final question. Cindy Yang, so the United View 1 is Trump is the victim. Yeah. I think it should be. Absolutely. And more importantly, I think the narrative also is the other side is actually doing the same thing that they accuse Trump of doing day after day after day after day. Do you think the victim narrative will motivate people to vote? No, I think they're going to vote anyway. But I think it's a question of who they vote for and why and how many people vote. There's a lot of factors in an election. Frankly, each election, it becomes more about turnout and less about the swing vote. The swing vote's getting narrower. Turnout's getting to be the bigger swing. That's one narrative of many. I think we can talk about the economy, talk about jobs, talk about people making more money, talking about the fact that Trump has managed to not start any major wars, unlike the last two presidents. That his America First message is actually doing well for us. And I think the other thing that I think actually is a very important message in the campaign is the question of who's dividing America. Is it Trump and his divisive rhetoric, or is it the media and the Democrats? But I repeat myself. Who is getting everybody angry? Is it Trump or the other side? I think it's a question that the American people are going to be thinking about. And it's a question that our side should be asking them to think about. Okay, final question from Cindy. By the way, Cindy, you are the first live chat I have ever had, so thank you so much. I think the mission for Mitch was to get this over by Friday before the Hannity Super Bowl interview in State of the Union. I think that happens. No, I don't, but I don't know. I will only say this. And I did used to work in Washington. when you're not there, you don't really know what is happening. And you should not, trust me, nothing the media is reporting is what's really going on. It's so much more complicated. And if you're not actually in the arena, you don't know. And even well-meaning people in the media are only getting, a sliver of the picture from any one source or another. So I don't know. I mean, the rumor that we're hearing on Drudge is that McConnell does not have the votes to foreclose witnesses. I don't know. But, as it is, we know for a fact they've got 2 more days of Q&A. So that's Wednesday and Thursday. So before Friday, I mean, even if they have the votes to dismiss, I don't think it could happen before Friday. So no, that seems unlikely. But no, I think, I don't know. I guess we'll see. Hey, thanks so much, Cindy, for being here. And yeah, anyway, just wanted to share my thoughts on what's going on. And again, hopefully offer our side some advice for how to do better on messaging. So with that said, thanks everybody. Hope this was informative. Let me go back to me so I can just say thanks again for watching. Have a good night.